Cybercrime isn't a problem you solve, nor a contest you win. It's a constant battle, fought every day. It's rats in New York, rain in London, delays in airports. It's a given. If you can be hacked, you will be hacked. Dave will open that phishing scam email. Sarah will access that public Wi-Fi, and you will be compromised. At Mandiant, we don't say this to be depressing or defeatist. We say it as motivation, as a reminder to solidify your commitment and to harden your resolve. Too many businesses are overwhelmed by the threats coming their way when they need to fully commit and never, never, never give in. That's where we come in. We counter every threat with a response, every probe with a shadow, every attack with an inspired defense. It's not enough to stop the breaches. We work to stop the attackers. This is the reality of business today, and we will be there 24/7, not just responding, but proactively preparing. So maybe no one can stop every attack, but we have the intelligence, the expertise, and the technology platform to never let them win. Stay relentless.
Hi, my name is Steve Ledzian. I'm Chief Technology Officer for Mandiant in Asia Pacific and Japan. And I'd like to start by asking you a simple question. Do you now or have you ever worked at an organization that's been breached? Maybe some of the audience would hesitate if they have been, but many probably haven't had that experience before. Mandiant has helped thousands of companies, about 1,000 every year, through a cyber intrusion. So we've had that experience through our clients who we help respond countless times. And every year we release a report called the M-Trends report, which shares all the aggregate insights, knowledge, and learning from those incident response efforts. Now, we don't share any details about any specific individual cyber attacks. We have to maintain and respect our customers' confidentiality, but the aggregate learnings often have a lot of good insights, and I hope by sharing some of those with you today, you can take back some knowledge to help better protect your own organization. This is a report that we release every year. This is our 13th edition of the report, and so you'll see trending over the last decade as well. So we'll start by talking about some of the interesting statistics that we see. Now, I'm not a big fan of presenting about statistics, but these statistics are really interesting. These metrics are really interesting. They come from Mandiant's firsthand observations of real-world cyber attacks. So they're not coming from surveys or marketing research. They're coming out of real-world cyber attacks. I'll then go on to talk about a notable threat group that's highlighted in the M-Trends report. I'll just touch very lightly on multifaceted extortion and ransomware. I know that this is a topic that's been beaten to death, and so we'll just touch very, very briefly on it, and then we'll conclude. So let me start with the by the numbers section. And the first interesting metric is around how organizations discover that they've been the victim of a cyber attack. Generally, we group this into one of two ways. Either they detected the intrusion by themselves, maybe a security control, maybe a MSSP service, something that they've invested in for the purposes of cybersecurity worked, and they were able to detect a prevention failure that led to an intrusion of an attacker. That's one way. The other way is when they fail to do that. And there has to be an external notification to that victim that they are a victim. Sometimes that comes from law enforcement. Sometimes that can come from business partners. Sometimes it comes from security vendors who have visibility into what's happening in adversary infrastructure. And so this notion of how often do companies internally detect cyber intrusions versus how often are they externally notified that they're the victim of a cyber intrusion? How often does each occur? And this was what it looks like over the last dozen or so years. The red at the bottom is external notification. That's not good. That's not what we want. The gray at the top is internal discovery of the intrusion. And you can see the trending is heading in the right direction. More recently, organizations have gotten a lot better at detecting their own, on their own, intrusions into their networks. Now, it's still roughly 50-50, and so there's a lot of work to do, but the efforts beyond prevention efforts, because these detections are assuming that prevention fails. So we need some sort of capability outside of prevention, and that's usually going to be a detection and response capability of some sort to notice these prevention failures, to detect the intrusions, and then to respond to them. Now that was the global view. What if we break this out regionally? We can break it out geographically by Americas, Asia Pacific, and EMEA, and look at internal versus external at a finer grain. And what we see is not a good picture for APAC. So we see 76% are external notifications. Obviously, it's better if you're able to detect the intrusion for yourself than to have to be told by an external third party that you're the victim of a cyber attack. And so why is it so high for Asia Pacific? Part of that is tied to ransomware. In a few slides, I'll share with you what's happening with ransomware, specifically in Asia Pacific. And we consider, I would say, most ransomware attacks tend to be discovered through external notification. And the externally notifying party there is the ransomware threat actor themselves. The ransomware threat actor deploys a ransom note, and that is how the victim comes to learn that they are a victim of a cyber attack. They didn't catch the ransomware threat actor themselves beforehand. It's the threat actor that reveals themselves, and we're seeing a pretty substantial increase in ransomware, specifically in Asia Pacific. And that's part of the reason why you see this external notification number so high in Asia Pacific. Adding to that Asia Pacific's trending in the wrong direction here. We were doing better last year than we are doing this year in terms of internal notification. And again, a large part of that is due to ransomware, and we'll talk more about that in a few slides. I think, though, despite that observation around Asia Pacific, the trend, over a number of years is that things are getting better. More organizations are looking beyond prevention, additionally to detection and response, and establishing a cyber resilient security posture. There used to be the phrase in cybersecurity that prevention is better than a cure. And it's true, prevention is better than a cure. But the catch there is that in cybersecurity, there is no 100% effective prevention. And so, yes, while you need that prevention, you're going to have to expect that sometimes that prevention is going to fail. And you have to decide, do you want a capability to respond to that failure or not? And of course you do. And that capability is detection and response. So we need both prevention and detection and response in order to be cyber resilient. Now, the next interesting metric is dwell time. Dwell time is the amount of time it takes a threat actor to be discovered. So from the time they break in to the time they defeat prevention, from the time the intrusion occurs to the time someone notices, to the time someone discovers that intruder in the network. And of course, you can't respond until you notice the intrusion. And in many cases, noticing the intrusion is not easy. Intrusions often go unnoticed. So the question becomes, well, how long? How long does it take organizations when their prevention fails? How long does it take them to notice that intrusion? And that's dwell time. And this is what it looks like. It's taking about globally an average of 3 weeks, 21 days, simply to notice, right, that a threat actor is inside the network. It's a modest improvement from the year before, 24 days down to 21 days. But if you rewind back to 2011, you see a very different picture. It was taking organizations more than a year just to recognize, hey, we have an intruder in our network. Maybe we should do something about it. And so a lot of the detection and response efforts have really paid off, really reduced the dwell time significantly. But 3 weeks is still a long time, so there's still work to do. Also here, you can see why it's better to have an internal detection of an intrusion than to be externally notified. It's just sort of common sense that if you can notice it for yourself, you're probably going to notice more quickly than if you have to wait until someone on the outside notices it and tells you. So internal detection is what we should be striving for, because that reduces dwell time as well. Now, what about ransomware? Globally, we see about 1 out of every 4 Mandiant incident response investigations is focused on a ransomware attack. That's a pretty substantial amount. And if we drill down into the dwell time of ransomware attacks, this is really interesting as well. Dwell time is 5 days. And by the way, when we talk about ransomware, we shouldn't think of ransomware as a malware. We should think of ransomware as a human attack, a human that breaks into the network, once inside the network, tries to make their way over to critical business servers, once on those critical business servers with the right level of access, steals the data off those servers, threatening to make that stolen data public, and then encrypting the data on those servers so that it disrupts the business. From the time that human ransomware threat actor breaks into the network to the time they pull the trigger on the encryption is 5 days. You have 5 days to notice that intrusion and intercept that attacker before you see business impact. Now, there's a whole other class of cyber threat actor that isn't interested in revealing themselves. They're interested in staying hidden. And for these threat actors, the dwell time is much higher. These are espionage threat actors, nation state or APT threat actors. And the dwell time for them is 36 days. So more than a month to detect the intrusion where the threat actor isn't actively revealing themselves like they do in ransomware attacks. And we can break out dwell time by region as well. You see Americas at 17 days, APAC dropping from 76 days to 21 days. And at first, this seems really good. That's a significant reduction, significant improvement, and that's great news. And part of it's coming from detection response. Part of it also is coming from the steep increase of ransomware attacks that we see in Asia Pacific. With those ransomware attacks come shorter dwell times, and those ransomware attacks are skewing the dwell time reduction that you see here from year 2020 to year 2021. I'll talk more in a few slides on ransomware in APAC. So let's talk about some good news for Asia Pacific. Here you see the dwell time just 5-6 years ago dropping from 498 days down to 21 days. That's a significant reduction. That's a really outstanding achievement for the security operations centers, the defensive teams that are working in detection response and trying to reduce the dwell time. That's fantastic. But 3 weeks is still a long time to have a threat actor in your network, and so there's still work to be done, but a lot of impressive work. And a lot of this is due to detection and response efforts. If you think back to 2016, EDR was pretty nascent, NDR probably didn't exist yet, XDR probably didn't exist yet. And so there's many technologies that have contributed into the reduction of this dwell time that you're seeing in Asia Pacific. Now, that's the case, but not for everyone. Let me explain on how to view this slide. Across the bottom, we have buckets of days of dwell time, right? 0 to 7 dwell time, 8 to 14 days dwell time. And across the left, we have the percentage of investigations that land in that bucket, Mandiant investigations. And you can see most of Mandiant's investigations, the victim has a dwell time of less than 30 days or so. And then there's a long tail. And then after 1,000 days, there's a 13% of our investigations have a dwell time greater than 1,000 days, greater than a few years. And so these are organizations that are still stuck in that prevention-only mindset, that aren't thinking about detection and response, that aren't thinking about what happens when my prevention fails. When it does fail, they don't notice, and they don't notice for years, and you don't want to be in this bucket. You definitely want a short dwell time to minimize the impact to the business, to the cost of incident response, to the brand reputation damage, and to the impact of your customers. All of those reduce when you notice intrusions quickly. Now, I kept alluding to the slide of ransomware in Asia Pacific, and this is that slide. And you can see in year 2020, about 12.5% of the incident response work that Mandiant did was related to ransomware. 1 year later, that triples to 38%. We are seeing, and we're seeing this growth of ransomware in Asia Pacific more than anywhere else in the world. Other regions are not growing at this rate. You might say, well, why is there so much more ransomware in Asia Pacific? And maybe there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it can be around disclosure laws. Part of it can be with the more aggressive stance that the US government is taking with ransomware threat actors. But for whatever reason, ransomware actors are targeting Asia Pacific. So while everyone needs to worry about ransomware, if you're an organization in Asia Pacific, it's even more so. And that is the key takeaway. Ransomware is having a disproportionate impact in Asia Pacific, and there's a number of things that you should do to address that. Manage detection and response, reduces dwell time. That's the goal behind any managed detection and response service. Notice intrusions quickly so that you can respond to them quickly, intercept them before there's any business impact. Reduce dwell time. That is low-hanging fruit. At 21 days average, there's a lot that can be done to reduce that. So at Mandiant, we have an MDR service called Mandiant Managed Defense. For our customers, we measure that we reduce that dwell time from 21 days, not down to 2 days, but we reduce it on average down to 2 hours for our customers. So if this is not a capability that you can build in-house, outsourcing may be something that you want to look at. We can look at attacks too. I think no surprises on this slide. Cyber attacks, the investigations that we conduct, they're across every industry. All organizations and industries are undergoing digital transformation. Cyber attacks are following them. Yes, we see more in financial, healthcare, business, and professional organizations, but no industry or sector is immune from cyber attacks. We also see a really interesting question in how do attackers break in the first place? And a few years ago, I would say that the prevailing wisdom was that attackers break in most of the time through email. What we saw last year was a slightly different picture. Email's still on there. We see phishing at 11%, but most of the intrusions that we see are happening from exploitation of vulnerabilities at 37%. And so patching has always been important, but even more so as attackers shift to exploiting vulnerabilities as a means for initial compromise into networks. Second position here, we see supply chain attacks. That's a little surprising, supply chain, and frightening because supply chain attacks are so hard to address. There's probably a little bit of skew in that number. The 2020 number was less than 1%. Here we are, the 2021 number at 17%, pretty substantial growth. Part of that was due to the SolarWinds incident, which impacted many organizations. Remember, these numbers come from Mandiant investigations. Mandiant responded to a lot of the SolarWinds intrusions, and so there's a little bit of skew there because of the significant SolarWinds breach. There's also this question of when attackers or when an organization hires Mandiant, they realize they're a victim of cyber attack. They need help understanding what happened and what to do about it. Mandiant comes in to investigate. Sometimes we find, yes, you're a victim, but you're a victim of not just one group. There's actually multiple distinct groups in your network concurrently. So the question is, well, how often does that happen? And it happens surprisingly high. In 2021, about 1 of every 4 investigations, there were multiple threat groups in the network. Sometimes organizations are responding to a ransomware attack. As part of that incident response work, we find, not only is there a ransomware actor in your network, there's also an APT actor in your network at the same time. The takeaway here is that attackers have many options. They have many ways to break in. They have many ways to achieve the various stages of the attack lifecycle. Need to be continually vigilant, validate your security controls, and make sure that you're protected across all of those stages in the attack lifecycle. So the next section moves away from statistics and talks about notable threat groups. The Mandiant M-Trends report highlights 4. I'm just going to talk about one of those 4. It's a group called UNC 2891. UNC, when you see this classifier, we have a couple classifiers. We have APT, number. That's a nation state threat group. We have FIN, number, and that's a financially motivated threat actor. UNC is a group that's uncategorized or unclassified that we are still gathering information on. We haven't put together quite all of the pieces, but it's a tracking placeholder. And we expose this threat intelligence to our customers because we know they want an early knowledge advantage of what Mandiant's seeing, and we share this in our threat intelligence. Anyway, UNC 2891, it's a group that's been active since at least 2019. They're a financially motivated threat actor. What makes them interesting is that they're particularly fluent in Unix and Linux machines, and they're particularly active in the Asia Pacific region. You can see in the upper right-hand corner this visual of the types of information, types of attacks they use across the attack lifecycle. They have a really interesting piece of malware called Slapstick, which integrates with Linux pluggable authentication modules, which gives them a hard-coded backdoor into the system that it affects, as well as recording login credentials of any users logging into that system. If you'd like to learn more about UNC 2891, there's a Mandiant blog called Have Your Cake and Eat It Too. You can search for that. We released it in March of this year. And our Mandiant threat intelligence customers will have a greater set of access to information on UNC 2891. They've been in the news quite a bit as well for attacking banks, particularly ATM machines, using some particularly sophisticated rootkit malware. And so if you're in a banking organization in Asia Pacific, UNC 2891 should be on your cyber threat profile, and you should be looking at the TTPs that they use to victimize their targets. I think the takeaway here is that attackers of course, are attacking Windows systems, but they're going beyond that. They are attacking Linux systems. They're attacking OT networks. They're attacking IoT devices. And the more things you connect to your network, the larger the attack surface grows. And so monitoring that attack surface is critical. I mentioned Mandiant threat intelligence, so I wanted to just quickly touch a bit more on that. So we cover a number of areas from cybercrime, cyber espionage. If you have operational technology, we cover cyber physical as well. We also cover information operations, or sometimes called influence operations, hacktivism, and those are just categories. Then from there, we have reports. Our threat intelligence, yes, it has the tactical threat feeds, but those tactical threat feeds are useful for prevention. We also need detection and response, right? And when defenders detect something, they need to understand what's happening. And to do that, they're going to need to understand malware. They're going to need to understand threat actors. They're going to need to understand TTPs. And Mandiant Threat Intelligence has write-ups on all of those, so that the level 2, level 3 SOC analysts can take what they're seeing and quickly use Mandiant expertise and intelligence to better action and intercept those intrusions which they've detected. We've recently just added to our threat intelligence a capability called digital threat monitoring. This extends our visibility into the dark web, into social media, into pastebin sites, and does essentially brand monitoring, brand protection, VIP monitoring, and a number of other things as well. So the intelligence capability is top ranked if you look at what the analysts have to say, and we're growing this capability all the time. If you have any threat intelligence requirements, please reach out to Mandiant. We'd be happy to talk to you. So this just really scratched the surface of what you can find in the M-Trends report. The report's over 90 pages long. I just quickly touched on some of the key highlights of the report. The report's freely available. I've got the QR code here. If you like, snap the code, download the report, and read it in your free time. There's lots of other information and on key trends, which you can use to apply to your own environments. Key recommendations, and I hope you'll find that that information is useful to you and to your organization. I'd like to thank you for attending the session. If you have any questions or would like to learn more about any of the things that I've talked about today, you can reach out to us at the email address apj@mandiant.com. That's Asia Pacific Japan, apj@mandiant.com. Thank you so much and have a great day.